Let's talk
about our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems.
Let's talk.
Confess I live in hell, I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony, where I can talk to you, you can talk to me.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk.
Welcome to the Talk Vermont. My name is Reverend Arnold Isidore Thomas, and it is good to have you here. We are discussing a rather controversial topic, and I am pleased that we have residents of the state to offer their perspective on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. This is not to be seen as an official policies of any organization or group. It is basically the individual concerns, perspectives, point of view of Jewish Vermonters. And next month we will do the same, providing similar perspectives on the part of Palestinian Vermonters. And so let me start by introducing the individuals who are part of this panel, starting with you, Aaron.
So my name is Aaron Goldberg. I'm a resident of Burlington, Vermont. I am a native of Burlington. I am a lifetime member of a Hasidic synagogue. I am a retired attorney and practice elder law and estate planning in Burlington for a long, long time. And I'm also an informal archivist of a Hasidic synagogue. I've spent a significant amount of time doing research on worldwide Jewish immigration and Jewish immigration to Vermont, and spending a lot of time researching the story of Burlington's Little Jerusalem, Old North End area of Burlington. And for the last many years, I've also been very involved in a project called the Lost Mural Project, which was saving a artistic heritage piece in Burlington and moving it to a Hasidic synagogue.
Yeah, good. And if you haven't yet experienced or have known about the Lost Mural Project, I encourage you to do so. It is a wonderful educational piece and an eye-opening experience about Jewish history here in the city. David.
I'm David Geddes. I have lived in Burlington along with my wife for 10 years now, to be close to one of our kids and his wife and their 3 children. I started my adult life as an academic archaeologist, and after a while veered into the private sector, and I worked in corporate communications for way too long. And I am, in my spare time now, I've retired. In my spare time now, I am president of Temple Sinai, and I am also on the board of Shalom Alliance Vermont. And I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you, David. So good to have you here.
Thank you.
And our third panelist is coming to us all the way from Wyoming, where she's visiting relatives. Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Daniels, and I have been living in, my pronouns are she and her, and I've been living in Vermont for about 6 years. Started in the Stowe-Morrisville area and then moved closer to Burlington in the Colchester area. I have 3 children. One is in Montreal at McGill, 2 are in Burlington High School. They're juniors. I have had a fairly diverse, peripatetic life, typical in Jewish diaspora. I've lived in Russia in the 90s. I speak Russian. I've worked with indigenous communities in the Southwest with Navajo and Hopi folks. And I've been a landscape architect with the Smithsonian. And I'm now working with Judy Dow at Gedakana. And I've also started a new venture called Talking with Strangers because I'm a longtime facilitator. And as far as my Jewish upbringing, both sides of my family are Jewish, of Lithuanian descent, and my father is first generation. We just enjoy a rich history. We're raising our children in the Jewish faith, and I'm excited to be here, have a conversation.
Jen, we're excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. And before I go any further, I also want to thank the staff of the Media Factory, who is working in cooperation with CCTV Burlington. And we also have, as one of our camera persons, Verity from Mount Mansfield Community Television. So we're so delighted by this cooperative effort to put this program together. CCTV could not fully be involved because this is town meeting day. And for those of you who are viewing this from outside Vermont, town meeting day is a day in which a lot of important issues affecting Vermont towns are voted upon. So this is a big deal within the state of Vermont. Before I also start asking questions, I want to provide, or attempt to provide, some historical context to the topic that we're addressing today, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Situated as a link to three continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe, the region of Palestine encompassing Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, has a tumultuous history of cultural, political, and religious conflict. And I will attempt to provide an abridged version of the historical context. Now, both Jews and Palestinians claim ancestral ties to the region dating back thousands of years. But most of the Jewish inhabitants either migrated or were expelled from the area as a result of foreign invasions dating from the Assyrian conquest in 721 BCE to the expulsion of most of the remaining Jewish population in the 4th century CE after the conversion of Roman Emperor Constantine to Christianity and the subsequent ban to Jewish settlements. With the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise and expansion of Islam in the 7th century CE, and the spread of the Ottoman Empire from 16th century to the end of World War I in the 20th century, Arab Muslims became the majority population in Palestine. Now, in the 19th century, the late 19th century, Theodor Herzl, convinced that anti-Semitism would prevent Jews from feeling at home in any part of the world, resolved that the only solution was the establishment of a Jewish state. In 1917, before the end of World War II, and after the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the British, which gained control of Palestine, issued the Balfour Declaration, favoring the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. The League of Nations gave Britain mandatory power over Palestine in 1922. Arab efforts to prevent Jewish migration led to growing tension and violence between Arabs and Jews, causing the British to announce their plan to end control of Palestine in 1947. The United Nations General Assembly then recommended partitioning Palestine into two states, one Arab and the other Jewish. And while Jews accepted the partition plan, declaring Israel's independence on May 14, 1948, Arabs both in Palestine and surrounding nations rejected it. Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria invaded Israel from all sides. Israel won the war and, as a result, conquered more territory than mandated by the partition plan. During the war, 700,000, or about 80% of the Palestinians, fled or were driven out of the territory Israel conquered and were not allowed to return. After the 1948 war, only 2 parts of Palestine remained in Arab control: the West Bank and East Jerusalem, annexed by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip, controlled by Egypt, both of which were conquered by Israel during the Six-Day War in 1967. Israel started establishing settlements in these occupied territories following the Six-Day War. In 1993, the Oslo Peace Accords between Israel and the PLO established the Palestinian Authority, also known as the PA, as an interim body to run Gaza and the West Bank, pending a permanent solution. However, further peace initiatives proved unsuccessful, and relations between Israelis and Palestinians have been marked by further conflict, especially internal conflicts, not just conflicts between Palestinians and Jews and Israelis, but also internal conflicts between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Hamas rejected the Palestinian Authority as a legitimate representative of the Palestinians, and in 2007 won control of Gaza from the Palestinian Authority, whose control is now limited to the West Bank. That brings us up to the present day, and I'm sure much has happened between 2007, between the Oslo Accord and the present day, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict focusing on Gaza, but also encompassing other regions of Palestine. So with that brief historical context, I want to turn my attention now to the panelists who are here. They may choose, if they so desire, to enhance or add to that perspective, because again, any perspective that is given can only be enhanced by those who have in many ways lived it. So I would appreciate if they have any more, if they have or desire to add any more to what I've already said before I ask any further questions.
Aaron, go ahead.
I guess two pieces of information I think would be helpful for the historical context.
Mm-hmm.
The first is that when, in 1948, when the UN, the League of Nations plan is discussed, it called for a Palestinian state and a state of Israel, and there was also a proposal as to how Jerusalem would be dealt with.
Right.
And the other piece is when the Arab country armies invaded Israel, there was also a mass expulsion of Jews, of somewhere between 850 and 1 million Jews right after 1948 have been expelled since 1948 from those countries.
From the Arab countries?
From the Arab countries, that's right,
mm-hmm.
that's right. The other piece that I would like to point out is that despite the current context that we have relating to Hamas, it's not just Hamas that's one of the principal players here, it's Hezbollah, but in
right,
addition to
Lebanon.
PLO in Lebanon, and we don't quite
Mm-hmm.
know who's in charge of Syria at the moment.
Yeah.
But while there is an ongoing war with Hamas, it's important to point out contextually that Israel pursued and achieved peace with Egypt and has been at peace with Egypt since 1979, which is 46 years, I believe, and also has peace with Jordan
right.
since 1994, and is at peace with the UAE and Bahrain since 2020, I believe, and the between what you mentioned, Oslo, and then we moved to, I believe, the Hamas 2007 takeover. There were several land for peace negotiations that were implemented, and we can go through those by date, but 2000, 2005, 2008, where Israel actually ceded land in it for peace, and the negotiations, then the actual agreements were not implemented later because of Arafat's armies and because of Hamas's armies.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So
Thank you,
I'm just
Aaron.
explaining that there were land for peace negotiations that were agreed upon, and then many other contextually, where I think what's happening in Israel now is that there are many Jewish people who are still trying to understand how and whether land should be negotiated for peace when there have been previous withdrawals from land and settlements, and the results have been hundreds of thousands of rockets and suicide bombers and many other acts of violence. So just to give you more context to your history.
Well, I appreciate it, and it also underscores the concern that we're not just dealing with one representative of the Palestinians, which was the issue of the Oslo Accords, that the Palestinian Authority be the representative of the Palestinian people, but they, of course, were not simply there was also Hamas, and as you mentioned, Hezbollah, and so that just adds to the tension, the lack of all the individuals who need to be represented in resolving this matter being at the table. So I appreciate that addition that you've made, Aaron. So given that addition, and Jennifer, David, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I could, for a moment, narrow the focus to build on what Aaron just said, to Gaza itself. As you pointed out, Arnold, Gaza, as part of after the 1948 ceasefire, Gaza was actually part of Egypt. It was annexed by Egypt, and at the same period, the West Bank was annexed by Jordan. They weren't simply controlled, they were annexed.
Right.
So there was this long period when Jordan and Egypt could have, if they had chosen, created a Palestinian state with Gaza and the West Bank that would have existed, but they didn't do that. Why, I will leave to others to discuss. In 2005, Israel withdrew completely from Gaza. There were about, I believe, 8,000 Israelis in several villages that they had built. They had built lots of other stuff. They pulled back completely. And the hope was Gaza could be the germ, the kernel of a real Palestinian state. Instead, in 2006, there were elections that Hamas won. In 2007, Hamas basically staged a coup and either killed or expelled the opposition. And so Gaza was from 2005 through 2023 totally free of Israel. And Hamas took over, and Hamas used it as a military base to shoot 40,000 rockets at Israel to terrorize Israelis. And they also, as we've seen, they built their military infrastructure around and under schools and mosques and residences and hospitals. And that's a key factor to understand the current conflict and why civilian casualties have been so high. But again, Israel did withdraw, and the Gazans could have become something, and Hamas took over, and the rest is history.
Thank you, David. Jennifer, would you like to
We can continue with the questions. I think this is a very indicative of, I know the use of the phrase, this is a very complex conflict. And I know that's been thrown back in many folks' faces as, there's a moral objective here. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians being killed, murdered. How can you just use that phrase? And that is true. There is way too many deaths. One death is too many. But as Aaron and David and you, Arnold, have explained, there are a tremendous amount of histories and stories and experiences that viewing this much more than just a tiny bit of land is really important to understand the question of how is the conflict happening, what is the conflict, and whether or not resolution is even in the near future. So, you have to look at Iran, you have to look at the United States, you have to look at Britain, you have to look at colonization all over this globe. And there has been an incredible magnifying glass placed very, very, very tightly, and to some extent it actually should be. But it is also important to step back to look at the why, and Aaron and David explained some of that. So that's just, that's what I would add at this moment in the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah. Thank you all. And I think what helps me in this conversation, and hopefully the viewers as well, is that we often address this issue from a political perspective, from either one side or another perspective, and we don't really get beneath that. There's so many layers to this conflict. There's so many underlying perspectives that we don't have access to, because the information that we get is often very limited, it's time limited, and so this provides an opportunity to hopefully delve more deeply into these concerns and discover perspectives that we probably never had before. So let me just throw out the questions that the panelists have at least been prepared for, and we can use this to elaborate on what has already been said, or to address new matters. So, what are your thoughts regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whether it is a conflict that can be resolved, and if so, under what conditions?
So I'll give this one a shot to begin with. So firstly, I just want to step back and to the historical piece to this. And I think what's also important to understand, besides the evolution of the United Nations mandate and implementation of the resolution in '48, was that that's coming out of World War II. Yeah. And of course, with World War II, with the Holocaust, you have more than 6 million Jews killed in the camps, in the concentration camps, and you have probably 6 to 7 million other people killed or non-Jewish. But you have more than 8 million people that are, substantially more than 8 million people that are DPs. These are displaced persons that Western Europe is trying to manage. And the DP problem stays in place for many years after World War II. After peace is actually declared, the Western European countries are processing and trying to manage the DPs. And so there is then movement of the DPs to other locations. And one of the pressure points for the British to withdraw from the mandate and leave it to the UN is the DPs. And because Ben-Gurion is then in Western Europe, and other Zionist organizations are in Western Europe lobbying for, all over the world, lobbying for the State of Israel through the UN initiative. So, but the DP population also is moving and to all countries around the globe.
So before you go any, explain DPs.
The DPs are dispossessed persons,
Right.
people who have been displaced from their homes, from their ancestral homes in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And this is a massive problem, a refugee problem, kind of like what you have now with refugees all over the world. And kind of what the United States is trying to deal with now in terms of refugees that are coming in, who are probably dispossessed from their own, within their own countries and trying to find a place that's safe. But for purposes of the evolution of the conflict, it's not just the UN resolution that offers this statehood to Palestine and the statehood to Israel, that there are other influences on the UN that where that's happening, or why that's happening, and that's because of the problem of managing this very large population base that has nowhere to live, nowhere to go, and so the Middle East is one of the solutions to that problem. But in terms of, so I think the question was what we think of the conflict and whether whether we think there's any hope. So I am always hopeful. I think that I will say that I have been historically a supporter of a two-state solution. I think the idea of a two-state solution has been seriously damaged by the October 7th massacre by Hamas, which really was nothing less than a modern era pogrom. I think that a few things have happened because of it. I think that it has set back the idea of Israel giving up land for peace, and I think that it has caused a significant uptick in distrust by Israelis of their own intelligence and of Western intelligence to protect the state of Israel. But going back to the harkening back to the whole narrative that we were just talking about, the historical narrative, the key to all that is that Israel has been in a state of war with all of its Arab neighbors, essentially, except the ones we've said that they've made peace with, since 1948. And a lot of that is premised on where we are now with the PLO Charter or the Hamas Charter, which basically call for the extinction of Israel and do not recognize the right of Israel to exist or the right of Jewish people to exist. Until those two problems are addressed, meaning if the Arab countries today that we are not at peace with would all say, whether Iran and if Hezbollah and Hamas, if they said that we would recognize the right of Israel to exist and we'll lay down our arms and we'll recognize the right of Jews to exist, I think we'd be in a different place. I think we probably would have been in a different place if the Arab armies had not attacked in 1948. But until you have a predicate, two predicates, one being the recognition of the right of Israel to exist and the right of Jews to exist everywhere, I don't think you'll have peace. And I don't think you'll have peace in Israel until the Palestinians decide that terrorism is not the answer and that the people in Gaza, who I understand are also victims of terror and a lack of a free press and censorship and are probably subject to murder or other atrocities because if they try to critique Hamas. But until there is a populace that is willing to invest in a government that will support them and their children and their studying and their religious and personal pursuits, then I don't think you'll be able to address peace with Israel. If Israel had a governing partner to negotiate with who represented all the Palestinians, I think this is also a real issue here. Who represents the Palestinians? Is it Hamas? Is it the PLO on the West, Hamas on the West Bank? I'm sorry, Hamas on Gaza, PLO on the West Bank, and then Hezbollah up in the north. And people should understand, Hezbollah is an armed force. Israel was having thousands of rockets fired into it even before daily, before October 7th. And they have over 100,000 rockets now in the Lebanon-Syria area that are controlled by Hezbollah that are able to attack Israel. So that's a major problem. I also think that the the current refugee crisis in Gaza is unsustainable it was before October 7th, it certainly is after October 7th, and it's not sustainable for the Israelis or the Palestinian people. But there's another piece of that puzzle that I think also needs further discussion, and that is the Palestinian people in Gaza and their refugee status. And one of the other pieces of this puzzle that has not been able to be solved by the other Arab countries is whether they will take any of them in. And many of these countries have refused for political reasons. The Palestinian people are seen, and certainly the terrorist groups, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas, are seen as a threat to the governing monarchy families in those countries. And so to a certain extent, it may have been easier for them to acquiesce to maintaining the Gazans and the Palestinians in Gaza rather than bringing them into their own countries because of their own concern that their monarchies and their institutional structures within their countries will be threatened. And so, and they don't want military parties in their own monarchies, and I'm not suggesting these are democracies either. Whether regardless of which country we're looking at, they're family monarchies essentially, very autocratic, but that is an issue. It's not just solving, but I think the starting point is recognition for the State of Israel, recognition of the right of Jews to exist, and abolishing the charter information in their own respective charters that indicate that that's not the case, and then stopping the glorification of the massacre of Jews worldwide, and maintaining an educational system that calls for the extinction of Jews.
Yeah. And so far, only Egypt and Jordan have acknowledged the right of Israel to exist. It was in the third part.
So UAE and Bahrain also, and
so the United Arab Emirates.
Yes,
and Bahrain.
Yes,
okay.
But Israel has been cooperating also with Saudi Arabia and Jordan, even though there's no formal peace with Jordan or Syria. There's all kinds. With Saudi Arabia, there's all kinds of agreements in place for them to work together. And indeed, I think one of the reasons why October 7th happened was because the Saudis were very close to another type of major treaty agreement with Israel. But those agreements with Jordan and Egypt are not just as to territory. They're on all issues: borders, security, water, agriculture, and economic relations. So my optimistic side is that if Israel can reach agreements with these countries, which have been in place for over 40 years, in Egypt, 45 or 46 years in Egypt and 30 odd years in Jordan, that could be done with other countries too. And it's certainly it certainly would be worthwhile economically for Israel to reach a peace. There's no advantage to maintaining a state of war, and there's no advantage to maintaining all of the level of fear in both countries that is now in place, which I think is why. But the other piece of the puzzle, I think, is leadership. In all the years since 48, even if we look at 48, I mean, you've had Sadat from Egypt, who really rose to the occasion and reached peace for his country, and I'm still waiting for that type of a leader to, and of course you had Rabin in Israel, but the previous, who I thought the previous, some of the leaders that you mentioned, Arafat and Abbas, if you go into a detailed discussion of the treaties that were supposed to be agreed upon and the land and peace agreements that were going to be placed, that were going to be implemented, they walked away from what would have been Palestinian states. It was going to be, I think the number is 95 to 96% of the West Bank was going to become a state that Arafat walked away from, according to Bill Clinton in the discussions with Camp David. And with Abbas was also going to have a substantial state, and it was going to be, again, it was involving, and indeed that one, that was walked away from not only called for land withdrawals, but Israel had also, in both instances, there was an agreement as to what would have happened for Israel. For Jerusalem and the old city, the city of David, the Mount of Olives, was actually going to be administered by a coalition of 5 nations, which was going to be Israel, Palestine, the United States, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. So there's always, if there is going to be a peace, whatever the peace is, it is going to involve some type of coalition of forces that is involved in maintaining different divisions, maybe buffers. But Abbas had previously discussed that there was going to be safe patches between the Gaza and the West Bank, and this had all been agreed upon. But from my perspective, there has not been a leader like Sadat from Egypt that has been able to move beyond the idea of perhaps themselves and maintain and move forward for their people. And I think you have to have that type of leadership that is capable of setting aside millennia of conflict and hostility and moving forward with the idea of creating a community. And there have been so many opportunities that and I'm not I'm not a historian. I'm an amateur historian. I'm speaking simply on behalf of myself. I would hope that would be the case, that someone will emerge from the Palestinian side, and that somehow Hezbollah and Hamas can be persuaded, much like the IRA was in Ireland, to lay down their arms and move forward into a political realm.
Let's bring some others. Thank you, Aaron. That was that perspective was really, we need to hear that. And I think not too many people know the nuances of what took place as far as the Oslo Accord or the Camp David Accord, which I think was Jennifer, David.
And you definitely, I don't claim to be anywhere near the history. I think there's a couple of things to carry on from what David spoke about. Leadership is one that I think is critical, both on who is the leader to represent the Palestinians, but more importantly, because we're really speaking about Jews, Judaism, Israel being a Jew. I've been honestly disgusted by Netanyahu's dehumanization. His coalition has absolutely dehumanized the Palestinian population, and as a result has created so much fear and anger directed at not only Israeli people, but Jews around the world. And so this promulgation of anger and violence and the ability to tear down Jewish and not just Jewish hostages, or mainly in Gaza, tear down posters on New York City sidewalks is really indicative of where we are as a globe. So to me, I think leadership is critical. Netanyahu's government has polarized and undermined this young state's attempt at democracy. I hope we can speak more on that, because I don't think it is, just like this country, I would argue, is still working very hard on its democracy, and we need democratic values, and we need to work a lot harder. But I also am, what I've done after mainly, for a long time, but particularly post October 7th, is to sit as close as in proximity with Israelis, Gazans, Palestinians. I'm on a call with Palestinians sharing their perspective, and it's not one of I want to kill you. It's one of I want peace. And if we had leaders who could continue to move these, and I know this is in some regards a pipe dream, and I know this is, I don't know, thinking that's not what you hear in politics, but I think that's a reason why we need new kinds of thinking. We, the main crux of the matter is that terror and trauma have been intermingled. The Jewish people have been terrorized and dealing and resolving their own traumatic events throughout our lives, as have the Palestinians and many Arab communities. And so the inability to resolve that trauma creates resentment, creates the ability to the necessity to resist. But Israel was, or Palestine before that, the Jews were never alone. It was an inhabited land, and we now live in a multicultural country, a multicultural world, I should say. And the idea of any supremacy is going to be pushed back upon. And so I really believe we need to be thinking incredibly differently. I mean, it's what's happening in this world, in this country. We are unraveling way too late of racial reckoning, at least white folks are, as we should be. And Israel is grappling with the same thing. My concern, and I think David alluded to, is that there's a tremendous amount of fear. I mean, I have family in Israel, and I had the app where you hear how many bombs are notifying you to go into your bomb shelter. There's so much fear that a lot of Jewish Israelis want Arabs expelled right now, and that is definitely not moving toward peace. And so to me, the only way forward is small micro leadership moments, more conversation, more information, and a moving away of vocabulary. We're so stuck on, are you a Zionist or are you an anti-Zionist? Don't you believe this is a genocide? We disagree, and we can't get, and Arnold, you said this, you can't get beneath it. Anyway, I'll pause there, but I really value the fact that you've started these conversations, and I do hope that we can move beyond and perhaps have Jews and Jewish and Muslim or Arab, Israeli and Jews sitting together and having a conversation, maybe not on air, but I'm really focused on Vermont. What does Vermont need? And I'm not an Israeli. I don't vote in Israel. It's not my conflict to resolve. I have family members that their lives are on the line. I have Lebanese friends, I have Palestinian friends, their lives are on the line. But the conflict that we need to really be worried about the most is what's happening in this country and what's happening in Vermont, and taking care of our neighbors. And that includes Jews who may have targets on their backs, and that includes Palestinians and Arabs who may also have the same thing. So that's my deepest concern. And the history is important, and I value both Aaron and David's knowledge. But I'm coming at this from a very humanistic, dialogic point of view.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
David, would you have anything to add?
Sorry, that was Aaron. I apologize. We just met.
It's okay. I think that Aaron and Jen covered a lot of the issues with leadership and terrorism. I think outside of Israel and Palestine, I think that people in Vermont, people in the United States, also need to move away from coming from an uneducated and largely lacking knowledge in history from the river to the sea. I was listening just the other day to a podcast with a Palestinian, and he said, that's not helpful. The Palestinians on the ground know Israel is not going away, and that the future for them is to build their own state. But I'm going to build on something Jen said. 2 years ago today, I was in Israel on a wonderful 2-week trip. And we spent 2 weeks in the West Bank. And one day, we spent the afternoon in a town on the outskirts of Jerusalem called Al-Walajah. And the reason is, this was with a temple from Minnesota where I lived part of the year, is Walajah was getting, quite honestly, a really raw deal by the administration in Jerusalem because it had been annexed by Jerusalem, which meant they had certain obligations, especially getting zoning permits. But the Israeli town on the nearby hill would get the zoning plan provided by the municipality or the city. But Walajah didn't. So because they didn't have a zoning plan, they weren't allowed to build houses and buildings. And the Israeli whatever would come in when they built things without permits and tear them down. And we were shown around there by members of the town council. And you would think that these people who were having houses torn down, and I have a little bit of concrete on my desk as a reminder that I picked up there. And they showed us the houses that had been destroyed. And we sat down and had tea in their front lawn. They weren't bitter. They didn't like it. They were like very frustrated. They were not people full of hate. They wanted to build a future. And people from that town, every day there are 80,000 people who used to go from the West Bank into Jerusalem every day to work. And they got they got paid Israeli wages. And that's what this town wanted. It wanted peace and it wanted freedom. And I am still amazed, and I have pictures of this. We could sit on their front lawn and talk, and they could be honest with us and we could be honest with them about finding a path forward. And for Walajah, what happens is there were a bunch of congregations in the US that raised about $400,000 to pay for a city planner to come in and do the city plan. But it's people to people, the way Jen said, and it's going to be from the ground up. And the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. Hamas, of course, are terrorists. I think the everyday Palestinians really want a peace and would like to move forward. It's going to take a long time, unfortunately.
My question, and in light of what you've already said, is that I think much concern among Palestinians about their situation, either as citizens, either as Israeli-Palestinian citizens, mm-hmm. or as Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza, is that this is a situation that probably has no solution that all sides are going to feel good about, and often the comparison is made to, and Jen mentioned how much of what's going on in the Middle East has comparable situations here in the U.S. Much of the situation in Palestine is often compared to this sort of manifest destiny that took place here in the United States, where Native Americans were uprooted and made room for white settlers. Often that comparison is made. Palestinians will say they were uprooted and moved to places where in other words, a Palestinian diaspora was created. And as history mentions, that also was the case among Jews, being uprooted, pogroms, pushing them out of their settlements, and forcing them to relocate elsewhere. So there's a sense on all sides that this is a dilemma and which all sides can relate to. And it's often a case of, must we choose the lesser of two evils, accept what has been passed, similar to our U.S. history? We have to accept the wrongs that have existed in the past, but still we have to accept that Israel is going to exist. How can Israel exist in light of the bad blood that exists on all sides of this matter? I guess the question is, can there be a state of Israel where you have a consistent Jewish majority that also wishes to identify as a democracy?
Oh, that's easy.
Well, that also wishes to identify as a democracy with a Palestinian minority, most likely to some extent a Christian minority also. How can Israel exist as a Jewish state in light of trying to maintain a Jewish majority?
Okay.
And now, I will acknowledge that there is within the Knesset, there is a Palestinian coalition, I guess you might say.
Yes, there is.
That is maneuvering and working with Israelis and trying to
Right.
make that happen. But my question, I wonder, how realistic is that? Tell me.
First of
tell me
all,
more.
have you been to Israel?
Yes,
Have
twice.
you talked to Palestinian citizens of Israel?
Yeah.
They're pretty proud. They're very troubled by what's going on, but they're not happy with Hamas. There has been, prior to October 7th, there was some research institutes in Israel that studied attitudes of Palestinian citizens of Israel. They're proud to be Israeli. The Druze, who are Muslim in northern Israel, it's a strong minority. They're proud citizens of Israel. They serve in the military. Israel has...
Ethiopian Jews and other
Yes, they
segments.
do. It's
Yeah.
a very diverse country. Half of the Jewish Israelis, half of them would be considered people of color by U.S. terms. They're in the Knesset. There are 10% of the judges in Israeli courts are Palestinian. The doctors, the nurses, everybody's treated in the same hospitals. Let me give some counterexamples. Ireland is a profoundly Catholic country, right? It's a democracy, right? Italy is a profoundly Catholic country. It's a democracy, right? Japan is a very homogeneous Japanese country. It's a democracy, right? Nobody questions whether those countries can be profoundly Japanese or deeply Catholic and a democracy. Why is the question even being raised for Israel?
I think the question would be that as far as Ireland is concerned, as far as Italy is concerned, there is no committed intent on the part of Italy and Ireland to maintain a Catholic majority, and any European country that even has a state religion, like England with the Anglican Church, Ireland with the Catholic Church, Italy with the Catholic, there is no intent to maintain a Catholic majority. And certainly the gray area as far as Israel is concerned is that we're not just talking about...
The German elections on Sunday elected a party that is committed to restricting immigration and to maintaining the German majority. Italy's government has a very strong anti-immigrant policy in order to keep immigrants out of Italy. yes, I think Israel can maintain its democracy. I think that the Israeli citizens of Israel are proud participants in that democracy, and it can continue to do so. I think the question in many ways is a red herring. It's just not.
I'm sorry.
I think it's a red herring. It's a false question, because on the ground you can go there.
Yeah, I disagree. I don't disagree with the things that you've said. You're right, and as is all things, honestly, everything we talk about, this entire sort of era of this conflict that we're upon. There have been previous conflicts. I'm always reminded of Arnold. I know you know Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who gave a beautiful TED talk about the danger of a single story. And that while what David just shared, I can't disagree with. And that is a valid sort of response to, is Israel, can it maintain, or is Israel a democracy? And also, Israel is by definition, it is a form of an apartheid state. And trust me when I say it kills me to say that, because I'm also a Jew, and I have my husband has Holocaust survivors in his family, and I don't want to invoke the Holocaust as a defense, because that is not my point here. But there are different license plates: for yellow for Jewish, green and white for Palestinian. There are separate roadways. The state doesn't provide land ownership. I think that, David gave a great example of permitting is almost impossible to get. And if you go to Adalah, you can see an index of laws that have been deliberately codified against Arabs and Palestinians in Israel. But it's a constant battle of, this story and that story. So there's nothing that's being said that isn't true, but it's also perspective. I don't believe supremacy works in any way in any country. And we've got to find a way through and past. And I've also been to Israel a couple of times, most recently May before October 7th for my niece's wedding. And, you can feel the, imbalance and dare I say levels of segregation. But I also want to say that it's important, particularly because we're in Vermont and Vermonters will hear this. The challenge that I've seen and the sadness I've seen, and this is the conversations I've had with Palestinian activists and Israeli activists, is their voices have been drowned out. And as I think David or Aaron said, by folks who don't have a full story. And it isn't just like this country. I completely understand the alignment of the Black struggle with Palestinians. I understand very well. Arnold, you and I have spoke. We've both been on the Vermont Social Equity Caucus. We know full well the history of our country here. The challenge is when we go to a binary. It's not Black is the oppressed and white is the oppressor. And I fear when we sit in that binary conversation, we must continue to dig deeper, because ultimately, whether we're talking about Israel, Palestinians and Jews have to figure out, or Muslims have to figure out how to live together. I highly recommend, and I have it right by me, Amos Oz's book, Dear Zealots. I highlighted lines from it, but we probably don't have enough time, but I recommend to folks who are listening to read. He's a brilliant author. But there's, we're in a land, and especially in our country, of fanaticisms. And when you choose to go against that, the fanatical fever of whether you're full on, this is a genocide and you're pro-Palestinian, or full on, you know, pro-Israel. It's the martyrs. And I know the word martyr is a scary word, but it's the folks, and Amos Oz uses that word, who want change. And I think we all, as Jews, need to think about, you know, how can we evoke change? And I'm really focused on this country. You know, how do Jews want to be remembered? I don't want to, you know, I don't want an Israel that is only known for its high-tech military prowess. I want an Israel that's known for its incredible writers and musicians and its incredible Middle Eastern food. I want an Israel known for that. It is such a beautiful country. I'm a dancer and I took classes with Batsheva. Anyway, I just want to, you know, widen the abundance of the conversation. But anyway, I'll pause there. I know
Well,
we don't have
Jennifer, I think you're going to have the last word on this matter.
Oh no!
I'm getting a sign from the producer that the hour is up, but we have just touched the surface. And
Oh my gosh,
this is
yes.
what I'm hoping is that this will be an ongoing conversation that will involve more than just Jews, but include Palestinians and really everyone who seeks a sense of community and cooperation, not only for the people of Palestine and the Middle East and Israel, but also how that translates here in Vermont and in the U.S. as well. So I am deeply honored and privileged that you, Aaron, you, David, and you, Jennifer, have blessed us with your presence. And I look forward to continued discussion. We will have a similar conversation with Palestinian Vermonters next month. And so we'll stay tuned. But in the meantime, be safe, be well, and be blessed. Thank you for joining us.
Let's talk.
about our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems.
Let's talk.
Confess I live in hell. I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony where I can talk to you, you can talk to me.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk.